The planet of Zorath was known across its region of the galaxy for its quiet beauty. Its cities glowed softly under twin suns, and its people had lived peacefully for generations. The Zorathians were proud of their achievements. They had built homes that shimmered like crystal, cultivated fields of strange, vibrant plants, and developed a society where knowledge and curiosity were valued above all. Life was orderly and calm. For centuries, nothing had disturbed their routine. But everything changed one ordinary morning when an unusual sickness appeared. At first, it seemed minor. A few citizens complained of weakness and fever, which was strange for a species that rarely fell ill. Doctors and scientists studied the cases carefully, assuming it was a passing infection. But then the numbers started rising. People in the cities began falling ill one after another. The sickness spread quickly like smoke through the air. Hospitals filled faster than anyone could manage. Families were forced to isolate their loved ones, and the once bright streets grew quiet and tense. The Zorathians tried everything they knew. They analyzed the illness, tested new medicines, and even adjusted the planet's environmental controls to see if that could help. But nothing worked. The sickness was unlike anything they had encountered. It attacked the body rapidly and silently, leaving the strongest citizens weak and the young and elderly most vulnerable. As days turned into weeks, fear grew among the population. People were not just scared of dying. They were terrified of being alone, of seeing their friends and families suffer and being powerless to help them. The leaders of Zorath were faced with a crisis unlike anything in their history. Emergency meetings were held day and night. Scientists worked in shifts, studying the disease and trying to find a cure, but the sickness continued to spread, moving from one city to the next, crossing borders and defying every attempt to contain it. Panic started to set in. Even the most disciplined citizens felt the weight of helplessness. The Zorathians were intelligent and resourceful, but here, their intelligence seemed useless. They could not stop what was happening. As hope began to fade, the Council of Elders made a decision. They would send a call for help. Across the galaxy, there were other civilizations, other planets with advanced technology and knowledge. Perhaps someone somewhere could provide a solution. For the first time in their history, Zorath reached out to the stars. They sent signals into the void, broadcasting messages of urgent need. The transmissions contained everything they knew about the disease, along with coordinates and a plea. Please help us. We are losing everything. The messages traveled for light years. The Zorathians waited, watching the skies for any sign of response. Days passed, then weeks, and still there was nothing. The silence was heavy, pressing on them like a dark cloud. They had imagined that their plight would not go unnoticed, that someone somewhere would answer. But no one did. Some tried to convince themselves it was just a delay, that perhaps help was on the way. Others whispered that maybe no one would come at all. Families clung to each other in fear. Children too young to understand the danger looked to their parents for answers, and the adults could give none. During this time, the Zorathians discovered something even more frightening. Their world, which had always seemed like a paradise, was considered dangerous by many others in the galaxy. They learned that their planet was labeled a death world. The very conditions that made Zorath beautiful, the unique microorganisms, the harsh climate, and the strange, unpredictable environment, made other civilizations hesitant to approach. To outsiders, Zorath was a place where survival was nearly impossible. Even if someone did respond, they might not survive long enough to help. This knowledge weighed heavily on the people. They had sent out a call for aid, but now they feared it might be too late or that the call would be ignored. Night after night, they watched the stars. They counted every passing ship, every flash of light, hoping it would be the answer they so desperately needed. Some tried to keep busy, focusing on research or caring for the sick. Others could do nothing but sit quietly, staring at the empty skies, feeling a helplessness they had never known. Despite the despair, the Zorathians did not give up completely. Even in the darkest moments, a small spark of hope remained. They tried to maintain routines to keep the cities functioning as best as they could and to support each other. Families shared stories and memories, passing down words of courage. Communities organized themselves to take care of the most vulnerable. Every small act of kindness felt significant, a shield against the overwhelming fear that threatened to consume them. Yet the waiting was the hardest part. Each day they wondered if they were seeing the last sunrise, the last light of their twin suns. Each night they feared that when they awoke, more would be gone. The Zorathians had faced challenges before, but never one that felt so absolute, so hopeless. They had relied on their intelligence, their technology, and their wisdom, but none of it could stop this unseen enemy. The sense of powerlessness was crushing. Then there were the children. In the midst of fear and uncertainty, they were the most innocent witnesses to the crisis. Their laughter had faded, replaced by quiet curiosity or tears. Parents tried to shield them, to explain the sickness in words they could understand, but it was impossible to hide the truth. Some children asked questions that adults could not answer. "Will anyone come?" they asked. "Will we survive?" Their voices, small and trembling, echoed the unspoken thoughts of every adult around them. As weeks turned into months, the Zorathians learned the full meaning of helplessness. They had reached out to the galaxy and still there was no response. They realized that their survival might depend not on skill or intelligence, but on a miracle. And yet, even in that realization, the small spark of hope refused to die. Some refused to believe that their world was truly abandoned. They looked for signs, for any indication that someone would come. They studied old records of interstellar contact, hoping to find a clue that could reassure them. The waiting changed them. It forced the Zorathians to confront fear in a way they never had before. They learned patience, a painful patience, as days stretched endlessly. They discovered resilience even when hope seemed distant, and most importantly, they learned the value of community, of leaning on one another when everything else seemed lost. The cities may have been silent, but the people within them were quietly fighting, holding on to the possibility that someone, somewhere would hear their call. In the end, it was this quiet determination that would define the first part of their story. They waited helpless in the face of a deadly illness and the indifference of the galaxy, but in their waiting, they did not completely surrender. They continued to live, to care for each other, and to hope. And though they did not yet know it, the universe had not entirely forgotten them. Somewhere far away on a small blue planet called Earth, eyes would soon turn to their plight. And when they did, the story of the Zorathian suffering and the long, desperate wait for help would enter a new chapter. One they had never imagined, one that would change everything. But for now on Zorath, all that existed was waiting. Waiting with fear, waiting with hope, waiting for the miracle they did not yet see. The Zorathians had sent out their messages into the vast emptiness of space, but the silence that followed was unbearable. Every day they listened to the faint static of the galaxy, hoping for a response, but there was nothing. It was as if the universe had turned its back on them. Citizens gathered at observation decks to scan the skies for any sign of life, but the stars remained cold and distant. No ships arrived, no signals replied. The people began to wonder if anyone even cared. Those who had once been confident in their civilization standing among the stars now felt abandoned. For generations, the Zorathians had prided themselves on their knowledge and achievements. Their scientists had explored planets, studied the galaxies, and created technologies that other civilizations admired. Yet in the face of this sickness, all their accomplishments felt meaningless. They realized that no matter how advanced they were, some forces were beyond control. The plague continued its merciless spread. Hospitals once organized and efficient were now overflowing. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, but their efforts often ended in heartbreak. Families lost loved ones faster than they could mourn, and children who had never known sickness or death were suddenly confronted with it every day. The streets, which had once been filled with the vibrant energy of daily life, now felt empty and haunting. Shops closed, schools were abandoned, and the usual hum of city life vanished. As the weeks passed, the Zorathians began to notice something else. Their calls for help had not gone entirely unnoticed, but the response they received, or the lack of it, was more painful than silence itself. Some distant civilizations had intercepted their messages, some had studied their situation, but fear kept them from acting. The labels of dangerous and Deathworld had convinced many that Zorath was too risky to approach. The knowledge that other beings had considered helping, but chose not to, reach them added a bitter sting to their suffering. The elders of Zorath gathered in secret meetings to discuss what little options they had left. Every strategy they proposed was tested, debated, and dismissed because of the harsh reality they faced. Even isolation strategies were nearly impossible. The planet was densely populated with cities close to each other, and the plague spread faster than any quarantine could contain. Some elders suggested focusing solely on the young and healthy, hoping they could survive and carry on their species. Others rejected this idea, arguing that abandoning the sick or elderly would betray the very principles Zorath was built upon. Tension grew in the council chambers, as fear and desperation colored every discussion. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. Communities organized themselves to share food and resources. People who were well enough took care of the sick. Small acts of kindness, preparing meals, holding hands, offering comforting words, became the thread that held the society together. In homes, parents whispered courage to their children, though the fear in their eyes betrayed them. The people of Zorath had always been resilient, but now that resilience was stretched thin. As months went by, the psychological toll of waiting became as deadly as the sickness itself. Some citizens began to lose hope entirely. They questioned the universe, the fairness of life, and the meaning of survival. Why had they been abandoned? Why did no one respond to their desperate calls? Nights were the hardest. The twin suns of Zorath disappeared below the horizon, leaving the planet in eerie twilight. The darkness was not only physical, it mirrored the growing despair in the hearts of its people. At the same time, stories began circulating among the population. Some spoke of civilizations that had survived similar crises, civilizations that had been helped by outsiders. These stories were rare, whispered only in private, but they offered a fragile spark of hope. They reminded the Zorathians that help might exist somewhere, if only they could reach it. Every citizen clung to this idea in their own way. Parents told their children, "We wait. We survive. Someone will come." Scientists repeated it as they labored tirelessly in labs. Communities chanted it quietly as they tended to their sick neighbors. Yet the reality remained grim. Every day, more citizens succumbed to the illness. Funerals became a common part of life. Streets were lined with empty houses, with only signs of recent departure. The Zorathians were learning to navigate a world that had become foreign to them, even though it was their own. They were learning to grieve and to endure simultaneously, a delicate balance that left them emotionally exhausted. The labels from other civilizations, the warnings about Zorath being a death world haunted their thoughts constantly. The very things that made their planet unique, the harsh landscapes, the strange weather patterns, the unusual microorganisms, were now seen as reasons for abandonment. Where they had once taken pride in these features, they now felt cursed by them. It was a cruel irony. The qualities that defined their world had made them dangerous to others, and now those qualities were threatening their own survival. Despite the despair, a few leaders refused to surrender to hopelessness. They urged their people to continue sending signals, to continue broadcasting their knowledge of the plague, even if they believed no one would respond. Even if help does not come, we must preserve our knowledge, they said. We must ensure that the next generation, if they survive, can learn from what we endure. In labs, scientists documented every case of the disease, every failed attempt at a cure, and every observation of the planet's environment. The hope was that even in failure, their work would mean something. Some citizens turned their attention to finding unconventional solutions. They experimented with plant-based remedies, tried alternative environmental controls, and even considered relocating populations to safer regions of the planet. The work was grueling, and the results were often disappointing, but it gave them purpose, something to hold on to when despair threatened to consume them. The act of trying, of resisting the helplessness, became a small but vital form of courage. Through all this, the sense of community grew stronger. In neighborhoods, people shared what little they had. They told stories to comfort children, sang songs to keep spirits alive, and supported each other in ways that went beyond practical aid. Emotional support became as critical as medical intervention. In these moments, the Zorathians rediscovered the depth of their own humanity, the capacity for empathy, courage, and resilience even in the face of overwhelming odds. And still, they waited. They listened to the stars, scanning the darkness for any sign of a ship or a message. Every signal they received was analyzed, every flash of light in the sky scrutinized for hope. Each failure was a blow, but each possibility, however small, kept the spark alive. The people of Zorath had learned to live with uncertainty, to endure the endless waiting, because to give up would mean surrendering to the plague entirely. The waiting taught them more than fear. It taught them patience, a difficult and painful patience that forced them to face the reality of their planet and their situation. It taught them courage, not the kind that comes from fighting battles or conquering enemies, but the quiet courage to endure suffering, to care for one another, and to keep hope alive when all seems lost. And it taught them resilience, the ability to continue living, even when life felt unbearably cruel. By the end of the second part of their story, the Zorathians were transformed. They were no longer the carefree, confident people of earlier times. They were hardened by grief, shaped by fear, and yet held together by hope and compassion. The waiting had taken a toll, but it had not broken them. And though they did not yet know it, the universe had not forgotten them entirely. Far across the stars, their messages continued to drift through space, reaching civilizations that might listen, that might act. Somewhere someone would hear, and when that moment came, it would change the course of Zorath's story forever. For now, all they could do was wait. Wait with fear, wait with grief, wait with the small, stubborn hope that someone somewhere would answer their call. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue planet called Earth, something unusual happened. Scientists monitoring space signals noticed a series of transmissions unlike anything they had encountered before. At first, the messages were faint, just a whisper of data lost in the endless noise of the cosmos. But the content was clear enough. They were cries for help. The messages came from a distant world called Zorath. The transmissions were urgent, filled with data about a deadly disease spreading across the planet, and desperate pleas for aid. Some experts initially dismissed it as a false signal or a glitch in the equipment. Space is full of strange noises after all. But as the transmissions persisted, more and more scientists agreed. These were real. Someone somewhere was in trouble. The government and scientific councils of Earth began to study the signals. They analyzed the language, the biology data, and the planetary conditions. They discovered that Zorath was considered a death world by the standards of other civilizations. Its environment was harsh and unpredictable, filled with microorganisms that could be deadly to outsiders. Many other species had received similar signals in the past and had chosen to ignore them, judging the risks too high. But humanity was different. Some of the scientists argued that the planet was too dangerous, that any attempt to help could end in disaster. The conditions on Zorath were harsh, and the disease could potentially reach humans if precautions failed. Yet there were others who felt that this was not just a scientific challenge but a moral one. "We cannot ignore suffering," one scientist said during a meeting. "If there is even a chance we can help, we must try." The debate continued, but eventually the decision was made. A special task force would be assembled. This team would be composed of the best scientists, doctors, engineers, and astronauts. They would not only have to survive the journey across light years of space, but they would also have to face the dangers of Zorath itself. The mission was risky. Some argued it might be a one-way trip, but humanity had a history of taking risks for the sake of knowledge and compassion. This would be no different. Training began immediately. The team practiced wearing protective suits designed to keep out harmful microorganisms. They ran drills for medical emergencies, containment procedures, and environmental hazards. Every detail was studied, and every possible danger was considered. Even the psychological challenges of leaving Earth and entering a deadly, unknown world were addressed. The team learned to trust each other, because survival on Zorath would depend on cooperation and discipline. Meanwhile, the people of Earth followed the mission closely. News outlets broadcast updates about the preparations, and scientists held public briefings explaining the risks and objectives. People were fascinated. It was not just a scientific endeavor. It was a story of empathy reaching across the galaxy. For the first time, many citizens felt a personal connection to a world they had never seen. They imagined the suffering of the Zorathians, their fear and isolation, and they cheered for the humans who were preparing to risk everything for them. After months of preparation, the mission finally launched. The spacecraft carrying the task force accelerated into the darkness of space, leaving Earth behind. Inside, the team was focused but quiet, aware of the enormity of what lay ahead. Some looked at the stars with wonder, others with anxiety. They were about to arrive on a planet where survival was not guaranteed, where the conditions could kill them in hours if they were careless. And yet, they were determined. The idea of turning away from a species in need was unthinkable. When they finally approached Zorath, the sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. From orbit, the planet appeared beautiful and alien, with cities that glimmered like jewels beneath the twin suns. But the damage was evident even from space. Plumes of smoke and dust rose from several areas, indicating fires and abandoned zones. The sickness had left its mark on the landscape. It was clear that the Zorathians were struggling to survive and that time was running out. Landing was difficult. The planet's surface was unstable in places, with winds, chemical clouds, and unpredictable terrain. Every step the humans took was carefully calculated. They wore advanced protective suits that filtered the air and shielded them from pathogens. Even so, the risk of exposure was high. The first few hours on Zorath were tense, as the team moved through empty streets and abandoned districts. Every shadow, every flicker of movement made them pause. But the humans pressed on. They had come to help, and hesitation could cost lives. When they first encountered the Zorathians, the aliens were cautious and afraid. The humans had expected this. After months of isolation, the survivors were not quick to trust strangers, even friendly ones. They hid in their homes and watched from a distance, unsure if these newcomers were saviors or another threat. But the humans acted slowly and deliberately, showing care and patience. They offered medical aid, food and shelter, and most importantly, respect. They did not force their presence. They allowed the Zorathians to observe and choose whether to accept help. The first interactions were small but meaningful. A human doctor would approach a sick Zorathian with a tray of medicine, speak in calm tones, and wait until the alien accepted it. Engineers would repair damaged water systems, and technicians would set up containment zones to prevent further spread of the disease. Every action was carefully designed to minimize risk while maximizing trust. Over time, the Zorathians began to understand that these humans were different. They were not conquerors, not opportunists. They were beings who had come across light years of space to save lives. As the days passed, bonds began to form. Zorathians started to communicate more openly, showing humans the patterns of the sickness and explaining the failures of their past treatments. Humans shared their own knowledge, suggesting ways to purify water, improve ventilation in buildings, and monitor patients more effectively. It was a collaboration unlike anything either species had experienced. The Zorathians were amazed by the humans' courage and determination. They had traveled to a dangerous world not for profit, not for fame, but purely to help. Yet the challenges were immense. The sickness was unpredictable, sometimes worsening despite treatment. Environmental hazards threatened the humans constantly, from toxic spores to sudden storms. Every step required careful planning and teamwork. The humans worked in shifts, resting only when absolutely necessary, driven by a mixture of compassion and responsibility. They knew that failure could mean the extinction of an entire civilization. The weight of that knowledge hung heavily over them, but they never wavered. Children who had been hiding for months in fear of the sickness began to emerge. They watched the humans with curiosity and awe, sometimes reaching out timidly. Adults guided them gently, encouraging interaction but keeping safety in mind. Slowly, laughter returned to the streets, faint at first but growing stronger each day. It was a reminder that hope could survive even in the darkest circumstances. The humans' presence also inspired the Zorathians to act differently. Communities became more organized, hygiene practices improved, and local resources were shared more efficiently. The humans did not force these changes. They led by example. Their discipline, courage, and empathy showed the Zorathians what could be achieved even under impossible conditions. Little by little, the tide of despair began to turn. Communication between the two species improved as well. The humans developed translation devices that allowed for easier interaction, while the Zorathians shared knowledge about their planet and biology. It became clear that survival depended on cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. The two civilizations, despite being light years apart and fundamentally different, were learning to work as one. By the end of the first month on Zorath, the humans had made a tangible difference. They had stabilized several districts, treated dozens of sick individuals, and prevented the disease from spreading further. The Zorathians, once isolated and helpless, were now able to see that aid was possible. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, hope returned. It was fragile, but it was real. And yet the story was far from over. Zorath was still a dangerous place. The sickness was not fully controlled, and the humans had only begun their work. But one undeniable truth had become clear. Compassion and courage could cross even the vast emptiness of space. The Zorathians had waited helplessly for help, and now across the darkness of the galaxy, the humans of Earth had arrived. The humans had landed on Zorath, and their arrival had brought a spark of hope to the desperate Zorathians. But the reality of the planet's dangers became clear almost immediately. The moment the spacecraft touched down, the team was confronted with a world that was beautiful yet deadly. Strange winds whipped across the cities, carrying tiny particles of dust that burned the skin and irritated the lungs. Toxic spores floated invisibly in the air, making every breath a calculated risk. The landscape was unpredictable, with deep chasms and sudden sinkholes appearing without warning. The humans had trained for extreme conditions, but nothing could fully prepare them for this. Every step required caution. Teams moved slowly through the abandoned streets, scanning for environmental hazards and checking the integrity of buildings. Their protective suits filtered the air and shielded them from most microorganisms, but the constant stress of knowing that one mistake could be fatal weighed heavily on everyone. Yet they pressed forward, guided by a determination to save lives. Their first encounters with sick Zorathians were heart-wrenching. Citizens who had been isolated for weeks, even months, were frail and terrified. Their bodies were weak and their eyes carried the weight of despair. Some hid from the humans, fearing that these newcomers might bring more danger than help. Others, too exhausted to move, could only stare silently as the humans approached. The doctors and nurses worked carefully, speaking in soft tones, offering medicine, hydration, and comfort. Each life saved was a small victory, a fragile light in the darkness. The humans quickly realized that the sickness was not the only threat. Zorath itself seemed to resist their efforts. Sudden storms could arise without warning, hurling debris and toxic rain across entire districts. Buildings that had once been sturdy collapsed under pressure or age, making rescue operations perilous. Even the wildlife posed challenges. Some creatures carried pathogens while others were territorial and aggressive. Every mission to help the Zorathians required meticulous planning, constant vigilance, and unwavering focus. Despite the danger, the humans never faltered. They organized teams to cover different areas of the cities. Some focused on medical aid, treating the sick and stabilizing patients. Others repaired infrastructure, restoring water, electricity, and shelter. Engineers worked tirelessly to create safe zones where the Zorathians could recover without risk of further exposure to the disease. Every task was coordinated, every action deliberate. The humans' discipline and determination impressed the Zorathians, who began to observe them closely, learning from their methods and gaining confidence that survival was possible. The most challenging part of the mission was working with the children. Many had been hidden away for weeks, and their fear was palpable. They were cautious, unsure whether to trust these strangers who spoke in strange tones and moved in unfamiliar suits. The humans approached them gently, offering small gifts, food, clean water, and toys fashioned from available materials. They spoke slowly and calmly, showing patience that the Zorathians had not seen in months. Over time, the children began to emerge from hiding, their laughter and curiosity returning in small, delicate bursts. The humans realized that healing a civilization was not just about treating the sick, it was about restoring hope and normalcy. 2. As the humans stabilized some areas, the Zorathians started contributing in their own ways. They shared knowledge about the planet's geography, the behaviors of local wildlife, and the spread of the disease. This collaboration allowed the humans to develop better strategies for treatment and containment. Together, they created zones that were safer for both humans and Zorathians, with controlled environments that minimized exposure to pathogens. The work was exhausting, often taking the teams to the brink of physical and mental fatigue, but the sense of purpose kept them going. Communication became a crucial tool. At first, the humans relied on translation devices to understand the Zorathians' language, but soon they began to pick up nuances, gestures, and cultural signals that helped them connect more deeply. This understanding built trust. The Zorathians saw that these humans were not just rescuers, they were partners willing to respect their ways while guiding them toward safety. Every conversation, every shared meal, every small act of care strengthened this fragile bond between two very different species. Medical operations were at the heart of the humans' efforts. They set up field hospitals in partially damaged buildings, equipping them with sterilization systems, isolation wards, and monitoring devices. They trained Zorathians to assist with care, teaching them how to safely handle the sick and use medical tools. At first, the Zorathians struggled, fearful of making mistakes. But the humans encouraged them patiently, explaining that every effort mattered and that mistakes could be corrected with knowledge and care. Gradually, the locals began participating more actively, a sign that the tide of hopelessness was starting to turn. The environment, however, remained relentless. Toxic storms would sometimes force the humans to retreat to their spacecraft or fortified zones, delaying treatment. Some streets were impassable due to sudden mudslides or chemical spills. The team adapted constantly, using drones and monitoring devices to assess risks before entering new areas. Each day was a delicate balance between speed and safety. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. One of the most dramatic moments came when a massive spore storm swept through one of the main cities. Visibility dropped to near zero and the air became hazardous even for the humans in full protective gear. Panic could have set in, but the teams worked with precision. They guided Zorathians to safer buildings, sealed off entrances, and coordinated rescue teams to retrieve those trapped. It was exhausting and terrifying, but their training and teamwork ensured that no one was left behind. For the first time in months, the Zorathians felt the true meaning of protection and care from another species. The humans' presence also brought psychological relief. Adults who had been consumed by despair found themselves regaining confidence. They saw that help had arrived and that survival was possible. Children, once fearful and withdrawn, began playing again in controlled areas. Families were able to reconnect. Even simple routines, cooking together, tending to gardens, walking through repaired streets, brought a sense of normalcy that had been missing for months. The humans taught not only survival but also resilience, showing the Zorathians that life could continue even in the face of overwhelming danger. As weeks turned into months, the collaboration deepened. Humans and Zorathians worked side by side, treating the sick, repairing cities, and rebuilding the social fabric. Trust grew into friendship. The humans marveled at the resilience and intelligence of the Zorathians, while the Zorathians marveled at the courage and dedication of the humans. Each side learned from the other. Every small victory, a life saved, a building stabilized, a child smiling, was celebrated as a shared achievement. By the end of the first major campaign, several districts had been fully stabilized. The sickness was no longer spreading uncontrollably. Safe zones had been established, and essential infrastructure was functioning. The humans had not only provided immediate aid, but had taught the Zorathians how to continue protecting themselves. The sense of hope was palpable. Where despair had once dominated, there was now cautious optimism. The Zorathians realized that survival was possible, and that their world, despite being labeled a death world, could still be a home. But even as progress was made, the humans remained vigilant. They knew that the planet was unpredictable, and that any complacency could undo months of effort. They continued monitoring the environment, the disease, and the well-being of the citizens. Their mission was far from over, but they had already achieved something remarkable. They had turned helplessness into hope, fear into trust, and despair into determination. The Zorathians, once abandoned and hopeless, had seen the power of compassion and courage firsthand. The humans had risked everything to reach them, facing deadly environments, unknown pathogens, and countless dangers. And in doing so, they had shown that even across light years of space, empathy and determination could overcome fear and isolation. For the first time in months, the streets of Zorath were filled with a new kind of energy, not the carefree vibrancy of the past, but a deeper, more resilient spirit. The Zorathians had survived the worst months of their lives. They had been saved not just by medicine or technology, but by the unwavering dedication of a species from another world. And though challenges still remained, the seeds of recovery had been planted, and the future, once uncertain, now held promise. The days on Zorath had started to change. After months of struggle, fear, and uncertainty, a slow sense of hope began to settle over the cities. The humans had done more than just save lives. They had taught the Zorathians how to survive in a world that had once seemed impossible. The sick were recovering, the children were playing, and families were starting to smile again. But the process of healing was far more than physical. It was emotional, social, and cultural, a transformation that required patience, guidance, and determination. Humans and Zorathians worked side by side to restore the cities. Buildings that had been damaged by storms or neglect were repaired, streets were cleared of debris, and water systems were restored. The humans showed the Zorathians how to create safer structures, resistant to the unpredictable hazards of the planet. They introduced techniques for purifying air and water, establishing safe zones where the population could live without constant fear of contamination. For the first time in many months, the Zorathians could see their world not as a threat, but as a home that could be protected. The sick continued to recover under the guidance of human doctors and nurses. Hospitals and field clinics, which had once been overwhelmed, became organized and efficient. Humans trained Zorathians in medical procedures, teaching them how to monitor patients, administer treatments safely, and respond quickly to emergencies. At first, many Zorathians were hesitant, unsure of their ability to handle such responsibilities. But the humans encouraged them patiently, showing that even small actions could save lives. Gradually, confidence grew, and the Zorathians began to take a more active role in their own recovery. Children were a special focus during this period. They had suffered most during the months of isolation and fear, and their emotional scars ran deep. Humans worked with educators and families to help the children regain a sense of normalcy. They organized safe play areas, creative activities, and educational lessons that were both engaging and reassuring. At first, the children were cautious, hiding behind parents or peers, but the humans' patience and kindness slowly coaxed them out. Their laughter, once silenced by fear, returned to the streets, and with it came a sign that life could continue. Community support became another essential part of recovery. Humans encouraged the Zorathians to work together, sharing resources and knowledge. Neighborhood groups formed to care for the most vulnerable, helping with food distribution, clean water, and hygiene practices. The humans led by example, showing that collaboration was essential for survival. Through this cooperation, a sense of unity began to replace the despair that had dominated the planet for so long. People were no longer isolated in fear. They were part of a community that could protect and care for each other. The environment of Zorath, which had once been a constant source of danger, became something that could be understood and adapted to. Humans introduced monitoring systems for storms, toxic spores, and other hazards, allowing the Zorathians to predict and prepare for them. They taught them how to identify safe zones, create shelters, and move populations efficiently in case of emergency. The Zorathians began to see that their death world could be managed, that its dangers were not invincible, and that they could live with knowledge and caution rather than fear. Health and hygiene were emphasized in every aspect of daily life. The humans helped set up clean water stations, sanitation systems, and safe waste disposal practices. They trained Zorathians in these methods, explaining why each step was critical. Over time, the general health of the population improved, and the spread of the disease slowed dramatically. The Zorathians realized that these small, deliberate actions could have a profound impact on survival, and they embraced the changes with growing confidence. Education was another crucial element of recovery. Humans shared scientific knowledge about the disease, the planet's environment, and ways to prevent future outbreaks. They taught the Zorathians how to observe symptoms, record data, and analyze patterns. The Zorathians were eager learners, fascinated by the humans' methods and insights. This transfer of knowledge was not just practical, it was empowering. It gave the Zorathians tools to take control of their lives and futures, turning fear into confidence and helplessness into capability. Cultural and emotional healing was equally important. The humans encouraged the Zorathians to talk about their experiences, to express grief, fear, and hope openly. Storytelling, music, and art became part of the recovery process. People shared memories of lost loved ones, tales of courage during the darkest days, and dreams for the future. These activities helped communities process trauma, rebuild social bonds, and strengthen resilience. The humans understood that saving lives was not only about medicine, it was about restoring the spirit of a civilization. Trust between the two species continued to grow. The Zorathians had witnessed the humans' courage firsthand. They had seen them face deadly storms, toxic environments, and unfamiliar creatures without hesitation. They had seen them prioritize the lives of others over their own safety. This trust allowed for deeper collaboration. Zorathians started to innovate alongside the humans, suggesting improvements to procedures, helping adapt technologies to the planet's unique conditions, and actively participating in decision-making. The mission had transformed from a rescue operation into a shared effort for survival and recovery. The humans also addressed long-term sustainability. They helped the Zorathians develop strategies to prevent future disasters. Crop systems were redesigned to be resilient against harsh weather and harmful microorganisms. Energy sources were diversified to reduce reliance on fragile infrastructure. Water purification and storage systems were reinforced. The goal was not just immediate survival, but the establishment of a civilization capable of enduring Zorath's challenges for generations. The Zorathians began to understand that their planet, while dangerous, was not a curse. It was a place where life could thrive with knowledge, care, and preparation. Over time, the Zorathians began to take pride in their recovery. Streets that had been empty and silent now buzzed with activity. Markets reopened, families moved through repaired neighborhoods, and children ran freely through safe zones. The disease, once unstoppable, was now under control. The atmosphere of despair had been replaced by one of cautious optimism. People were still vigilant. They knew the planet was unpredictable, but they also knew that survival was possible. One of the most significant moments of recovery came when the first child born, after the arrival of humans, took their first breath. Families had feared that the sickness would prevent new generations from thriving, but this birth symbolized hope, renewal, and continuity. Communities celebrated, not only because a life had been saved, but because it represented the possibility of a future that had once seemed impossible. The humans shared in this joy, witnessing the direct results of their efforts and the resilience of the Zorathians. The recovery of Zorath was not complete, but the transformation was undeniable. The humans had taught the Zorathians how to adapt, how to heal, and how to take control of their lives. They had shown that courage, knowledge, and compassion could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The Zorathians, once helpless and abandoned, were now equipped to thrive in their world, armed with skills, strategies, and a renewed sense of hope. By the end of this period, the bond between the two species had grown strong. The humans had come as rescuers, but they had left as partners, teachers, and friends. The Zorathians had learned to trust again, to hope again, and to see their planet not as a death world, but as a place where life could flourish. The story of survival had shifted from desperation to resilience, from helplessness to empowerment, and from fear to hope. The healing of Zorath was a testament to what could be achieved when empathy met courage. Humans had traveled across the galaxy to a world that many had abandoned, faced dangers beyond imagination, and worked tirelessly to restore a civilization. And in doing so, they had not only saved lives, they had inspired a species to believe in the possibility of a future once again. The days on Zorath had grown brighter. The once dying cities now hummed with life. Streets were bustling again, children ran freely, and families worked together to rebuild their communities. The sickness that had brought fear and despair across the planet was under control. Human efforts combined with the Zorathians' resilience had restored hope where there had once been only hopelessness. And yet the humans knew that their mission was approaching its end. Preparations for departure began quietly. The humans had spent months training Zorathians to manage their own recovery, equipping them with knowledge, tools, and strategies to face future challenges. They had built infrastructure, set up safe zones, and ensured that the population could continue without constant outside assistance. The last phase of the mission was critical. Leaving too early could undo months of progress, but staying indefinitely was impossible. The Zorathians had mixed feelings. Gratitude and admiration for the humans were immense, but there was also sadness. They had come to rely on these visitors, to trust them not just as rescuers but as friends. Many wondered how the planet would feel once the humans left. Would life return to normal, or would the fears and dangers reassert themselves? These questions lingered in every community, in every heart. The humans, too, felt the weight of departure. They had risked their lives to reach a distant world, faced dangers they could not have imagined, and witnessed suffering beyond what they had prepared for. Bonds had been formed, not just professional but deeply personal. They had shared meals, laughter, and sorrow with the Zorathians. They had comforted children, guided adults, and celebrated life alongside a species very different from their own. Leaving would not be easy. Before departure, the humans called a final assembly in the central plaza of the main city. Zorathians gathered, watching the humans with a mix of awe and emotion. For months, the humans had been a symbol of hope, and now in their final moments together, that symbol was more powerful than ever. One of the human leaders spoke first, their voice calm but filled with warmth. "We did not come to conquer. We came to help. And together we have shown that even in the darkest times, hope can survive. You are strong, resilient, and capable. We leave you now with tools, knowledge, and courage. Take care of each other and your world will thrive." The Zorathians listened, tears shining in their eyes. They had never imagined that life beyond their own world could be so full of empathy, courage, and dedication. They realized that their survival had not just been a matter of medicine or technology. It had been about the human spirit, about determination and compassion. In that moment, they felt a bond that transcended distance, culture, and even species. Children stepped forward to give gifts, drawings, small trinkets, and simple tokens of appreciation. The humans accepted them with gentle smiles, understanding that these gestures were not just about gratitude but about connection. The gifts were exchanged with care, a silent promise that the relationship formed on Zorath would continue in memory, and perhaps in future collaboration. The humans also made sure to leave behind mentors among the Zorathians. Selected citizens had been trained in medical care, environmental monitoring, and disaster response. These individuals would become leaders, passing on the knowledge and skills necessary to protect the population and ensure continued recovery. The humans emphasized that these mentors were not just teachers, they were symbols of self-reliance, proof that the Zorathians could survive on their own. As the humans prepared to board their spacecraft, a quiet stillness fell over the plaza. Zorathians of all ages gathered to watch, to say goodbye, and to honor the efforts that had saved their civilization. Some embraced the humans, holding them tightly in a mix of relief and sorrow. Others bowed or gestured in ways that conveyed deep respect. It was a farewell that carried not just gratitude but understanding. These visitors had changed the course of history for Zorath. The spacecraft lifted off slowly, its engines humming against the alien sky. From below, the Zorathians watched as it climbed higher, shrinking against the backdrop of their twin suns. They felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in their own resilience, sadness at the departure of those who had risked everything for them. And yet there was also a profound sense of connection. Across the vastness of space, the humans of Earth had become part of Zorath's story, and that story would never be the same again. In the days following departure, the Zorathians began to adjust fully to their new reality. They implemented the strategies taught by the humans, maintaining the safe zones, monitoring environmental hazards, and managing health with the knowledge they had gained. Life on Zorath was not without challenges. Storms, unpredictable terrain, and the lingering remnants of the disease remained. But the people now faced these dangers with confidence. They had learned that knowledge, cooperation, and courage were stronger than fear. Communities thrived once more. Markets opened fully. Children attended schools, and neighborhoods celebrated festivals that had been impossible for months. Families reconnected, sharing stories of survival and perseverance. The culture of Zorath began to reflect the lessons learned during the crisis. Resilience, collaboration, and compassion became core values. Where despair had once dominated, hope now guided every decision. The story of the humans' arrival spread across the planet. Citizens shared tales of bravery, ingenuity, and empathy. Children told one another about the strange visitors who had crossed light years to save them. Adults remembered the nights when death seemed certain, and how hope returned with the presence of humans. These stories became part of the culture, a permanent reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, help can come, and courage can cross the galaxy. Some Zorathians began to explore the skies, inspired by the humans' journey. They studied space travel, planetary communication, and the possibility of reaching beyond their own world. The humans had not only saved lives, they had expanded the imagination of an entire species. Dreams that had once seemed impossible now had form, and ambition found a new home on Zorath. As months turned into years, Zorath grew stronger. The planet's hazards were still present, but the civilization was equipped to face them. Healthcare systems were organized, infrastructure was resilient, and communities were united. The children who had once hidden in fear now ran freely, educated and confident, representing the future of a world that had almost been lost. And through it all, the memory of the humans who had arrived in their darkest hour remained alive, a story of hope, courage, and the power of compassion. Even though the humans had returned to Earth, their impact endured. Communication channels remained open, allowing knowledge to continue flowing between the two worlds. Occasional messages, advice, and updates reinforced the bond that had been forged in crisis. The Zorathians understood that they were no longer alone, not truly, and that the universe, though vast and often indifferent, could also contain allies willing to act with courage and empathy. The final lesson of this chapter was clear. Survival is never just about strength or skill. It is about community, trust, and the willingness to act for others. The humans had demonstrated that across distances, across species, compassion could be a force more powerful than any obstacle. The Zorathians had learned to trust, to hope, and to thrive. And together, these two civilizations had created a story that would be told for generations. A story of waiting, of despair, of courage, and ultimately of salvation. Zorath was no longer a death world in the hearts of its people. It was a home, a place of life, resilience, and opportunity. The humans of Earth had arrived when the galaxy had not responded, and in doing so they had shown what it meant to be courageous, compassionate, and truly alive. The Zorathians would never forget this lesson. Their civilization, once on the brink of extinction, had been reborn, and as they looked to the twin suns in the sky, they knew that hope, once rekindled, could never be extinguished again.